right, welcome back for the first video lesson of our third week of distance learning. So if you remember from way back on Wednesday, you guys took your practice quiz and quiz on adjectives so that we could sufficiently wrap up the adjectives unit. You were able to see what you were struggling with on the practice quiz and make those improvements on the final quiz. So hopefully you are understanding all of those concepts because we are moving right along to something very similar but also very different, which is adverbs. And we're also going to do a random bit on interjections as well. So like last unit, here is our unit overview. There are going to be 3 goals related to adverbs and 1 goal related to interjections. So just to give an overview of those, 2.1, you will be able to recognize and use adverbs as the part of speech used to modify a verb, adjective, or another adverb. 2.2, you will be able to recognize and use nouns as they can also act as adverbs. So this will sound familiar from last unit. Goal 2.3, you will be able to recognize the difference between adverbs and adjectives, so kind of being able to make that distinction between what we learned about last unit and what we're learning about now. And then goal 2.4, which is super random, interjections, we had to get it in there somehow. You will be able to recognize and use interjections as words that express feelings or emotions and function independently in a sentence, right? So we're covering quite a variety of things. It's not going to be as long as the adjectives unit. You will have a quiz by the beginning of next week. And just to give you a little warning, it's not going to be as long or as extensive as the last quiz, just because we're covering a lot less material. So adverbs 2.1, the goal that we are focusing on today is being able to recognize and use adverbs as a part of speech used to modify a verb, adjective, or another adverb. So today is just going to be a nice little introduction to the unit as a whole. I'm showing you what an adverb is and kind of what that does in a sentence. So what is an adverb? Like adjectives, very, very similar concept. They could almost be smushed into the same unit, but I wanted to make that distinction for you. Adverbs are used to describe or add information about other words. So if we go way back to the beginning of the adjectives unit, we talked about how there are certain parts of speech that are essential to a sentence, right? So we have our nouns and our verbs. We need those to communicate a thought. And then adjectives come in and they describe things and they make things fluffier and more beautiful. And then adverbs do even more describing, so they make it even more specific and show how or when something is happening. And so it's really just giving more information for your writing, making things clearer for your reader. So when you're using adverbs in a piece of writing, it's something that you're doing to make your message more clear. By definition, this is a word that modifies a verb, an adjective, or another adverb. The many jobs of adverbs, so they do a lot more things than the adjectives do. But please, it's really distracting. Sorry about that. The joys of teaching from home. My sister wanted to say something in the lesson. I think she thought we were on Zoom, but we are not. Anyway, so adverbs do a variety of things. Just like adjectives kind of have different forms they can take, adverbs do as well. There's no way that we can really put the adverbs into categories like we did for the adjectives, just because there are so many different ones. And the difference with adverbs is that they all kind of do different things. Whereas adjectives are all doing describing, adverbs are also describing, but answering different questions. It'll make more sense once I get into it. So just as adjectives answer questions about nouns and pronouns, adverbs answer questions about the words they modify. They will tell you when, to what extent, where, and in what manner. Come on, Google Slides. There we go. So here's how this breaks down. It's very simple if you remember it this way, because you won't get mixed up knowing like, oh, is this adverb describing an adjective or a verb or another adverb? You'll know because an adverb modifying a verb can answer any of the 4 questions from the last slide. So it can tell you when, to what extent, where, or in what manner, any of those things. An adverb modifying an adjective or another adverb, however, will only answer one question, and that is to what extent. So if you see this question being answered, you know right away that the adverb is modifying an adjective or an adverb, and that's something you'll have to identify going forward on a quiz or assignment. So this chart is going to become your very best friend. I pulled this right out of the textbook. This is what I use to make these lessons and assignments. So this isn't all the adverbs. Like I said, there's a ton of them. You know, you can pull them out of thin air. They're so common. But this kind of breaks down what I talked about on the last slide with how the verbs are modified and how adverbs and adjectives are modified. So like I said, adverbs can answer all 4 questions about verbs. So all of these are verbs here: slide, move, sit, and slipped. So we can say where this action is being done: slide under, move near, sit there, slipped between. It can say in what way the verb is being done. So reacted positively, silently nodded, left quickly, rudely laughed, was cheerfully humming. It could also say when. So when something is happening, when an action is being done. Often asks, sails daily, should have answered promptly. That's kind of a longer one. And soon will depart. So as you know from the verb unit, the entire verb phrase is in there. So will depart, but the only part that's an adverb is soon. And I hope that you remember, because I tried to make this as clear as possible back in the verbs unit, that adverbs are not a part of the verb phrase. And so on your test, I was like, do not include those adverbs because they are not a part of it. They are simply making the message more clear. They are not a part of the verb phrase. So now that we're getting into adverbs, you can see they're just kind of adding on to the concept. So the plane will depart. Well, when we add soon in there, we know around what time or when it will depart. So all that adverbs and adjectives do, like I said, is make things more specific. So we can also talk about to what extent, widely read, barely walks, researched further, had just started, must not have finished. So this is kind of talking about like how far or how not far are we going with something. It's very hard to describe. Like, is it going to be very widely reading, or is it going to be very specifically reading? Is it going to be barely walking, or is it going to be mostly walking? You know, we're kind of comparing in terms of how far we're going with something. And you'll start to understand that as we do more examples. So that's the easy stuff, right? Because in the word adverb, we have the word verb. So you can think of it like, okay, a lot of these adverbs are going to be adjectives for verbs, describing words for verbs, describing where, when, in what way, to what extent a verb is happening. That's the first chunk that you have to remember. Okay, so we know what verbs are. We did that in quarter 3. We know what adjectives are. We just did that last week. So now what we have to look at is when an adjective is being described by an adverb. So very tall. Okay, tall is a describing word. Somewhat satisfied. Satisfied is a describing word. Frequently absent, not sad. All words that describe nouns. And the only thing that an adverb can do for these adjectives is say, to what extent is this person, place, or thing this way? Are they very tall? Are they somewhat tall? You know, are they not tall? It's very, very simple. Only can answer one question. Same thing with the adverbs describing the adverbs. Very thoroughly, not exactly, more quickly, quite definitely. So here we see adverb on adverb. And that's how you're going to know. We're answering this question, but we are using an adverb to do it. So all that we're doing is just getting really, really specific. That's the job of an adverb, is to make things more specific. All right, so if I were you, I would go ahead and just like take a picture of this chart because it's going to be super helpful for you just to be able to pull that out maybe when you're doing an assignment. You're like, wait a minute, like how do I know this is a adjective being described or a verb being described? Look at your chart because it'll make it very clear for you. Moving on, here's some examples in actual sentences. So a few snail species crawl slowly among corals and feed hungrily upon them. So our adverbs are slowly and hungrily. So slowly is modifying the verb crawl, slowly crawl, describing how the snails are crawling. Hungrily is modifying the verb feed. How are they feeding? They're hungrily feeding. Okay, next example. For many years, snail shells were used quite frequently by people in Africa, Asia, and Melanesia as a form of currency. So if we look at our first adverb, quite, and we go to frequently, What we notice here is that we're kind of drifting out of the category of adverbs modifying verbs, and we're going into adverbs modifying adverbs. So quite frequently, okay? That's a very, very specific two-word combination of adverbs to describe how they are used. So frequently is directly modifying the verb used. Frequently used. It gets kind of tricky, but the main thing that you have to know, which we'll get into on Wednesday, is the difference between an adverb and an adjective. Because if you can make that distinction, you can chalk off all the words that are adverbs and all the words that are adjectives easy and make those connections about what's being modified specifically. All right, so let's do our little pause and think. What I want you to do, these are the same as on the last page, just nice little examples. Read each sentence and find all the adverbs first, and then see if you can tell which word the adverb is modifying. So you're going to find all your adverbs and say, okay, is this adverb modifying a verb, another adverb, or an adjective, and where is that thing? All right, so I'll go ahead and have you pause the video. All right, hopefully you paused. Here are your answers. All right, so cowries are a very common variety of sea snails that are generally found in warm tropical waters. Very is modifying our adjective common, and then generally is modifying the verb found. They are mostly nocturnal animals, and they usually feed on algae. Mostly is modifying our adjective nocturnal, it's describing the noun animals, and usually is modifying our verb feed. Number 3, these small creatures often have brilliantly colored shells. I have to wait for the bar to go away. Okay, adverbs often is modifying the verb have. All right, and then brilliantly is modifying the adjective colored. This is one of those tricky things where it looks like a verb, but we're not saying that the shells are coloring. They're not using crayons. They have colored shells, and therefore colored is an adjective in this case. So we're throwing it back to last unit with the verbs or with the adjectives and understanding what a verb as an adjective looks like. So this stuff can get kind of confusing. If you're going to take time focusing on any one of these lessons, I would say focus on this one so that you really, really understand what an adverb is, what it can look like, and what questions it is answering. All right, so what's due today is your Monday check-in like normal. You're just answering the questions to the best of your ability. And then the 2.1 practice assessment, which will be 10 questions in very similar format to what you just did in a couple other different variations, which will be due by some point tomorrow. I would advise doing it right after you watch this video so it's all fresh in your brain. Remember, the new requirement is that you do have to get a 7 out of 10 on all the practice assessments to be able to move on to the next day's work. You have to watch the videos to move on to the assignments. You've already done that, obviously you're here, but just remember that'll be the expectation going forward. So just know that you will have unlimited tries on the practice assessments, but you do have to hit that 7 so that you can show me that you really understand adverbs before you're moving on to deeper stuff. All right, let me know if you have any questions. My Zoom office hours will be tomorrow from 1 to 2, so please message me if you feel like any of this is confusing and you would like to meet with me. All right,